This is John Zannis here with NHL Insider, College Hockey Insider, High School Prep Hockey Insider, Evan Marinofsky of the New England Hockey Journal, formerly CLNS Media, still sometimes CLNS Media, host of the Bruins
Oh
podcast. Uh, kind of poke the bear. You see a lot of Evan Marinofsky here, obviously, and so we're going to do a little Bruins talk, Bruins postgame show. Going to try this one out. We might be seeing you guys a little bit more throughout the playoffs here, with some other cast of characters to be announced, taking us through what we're hoping is a really long and fruitful playoff run. Bruins. This was a weird one for anybody who's a hockey fan and anybody who's a Bruins fan. They played at home and they lost. It doesn't happen. This game was icky, Evan. This isn't a game they should have lost. This was a weird one. Weird bounces, weird mistakes you don't normally get from people who don't normally make them. And a game I thought the Bruins controlled for the most part. They kept the Oilers they limited high danger chances. They did a great job on McDavid, and somehow they kind of they just let them score 3 goals and take the game. It just feels it feels stolen to me.
It was weird. It's like, they focused so hard on shutting McDavid down, and they actually did a good job of it.
Yeah.
And the Oilers still found ways to win. Now, I think this is bigger for the Oilers, honestly. I think the fact that the Oilers came into Boston, did something that no teams have really been able to do this year. The Bruins took a 2-0 lead. The Oilers still came back and won. The Bruins were leading after 2 periods. Oilers still came back and won. I think this is bigger for the Oilers. You see, Patrice Bergeron making a mistake that leads to a goal. That doesn't happen.
Multiple
ever.
on the one play, and then he commits a penalty minutes later. So yeah, he was. You don't see that from Bergeron very often. Your first line with your top pairing defense against their fourth line, and you're just giving stuff away. I mean, just really weird, uncharacteristic stuff for the Bruins. It's almost like they just kind of. You don't see them do it very often. They just kind of put it into cruise control a little bit and gifted the Oilers a couple goals.
Yeah, it's funny. You do forget, though, that the Bruins did have that the Krejci one-timer on the power play that got nixed off because of offsides 30 seconds prior, which I never like. I know maybe people think it's just, I'm being a homer, but I honestly don't. I don't like that.
You can't let them play on that long. I agree, Evan. You can't let them play on that long and then determine something that happens that far after. It's completely different situation at that point. I find that insane. I totally agree.
The Oilers, I mean, again, you think about it. I think Ty Anderson tweeted this. The Oilers had 30 seconds to try and defend the Bruins and get the puck out of the zone, and it makes no sense to me why that rule is still in place. That is still there, and I've again, it's also just like, John, you probably agree with this with me on this about basketball, baseball, instant replay is all fun and all, but then you see. That's a natural progression of the game. That's like, I think it was it Zaka who was offsides by this much. So again, I look at that game and I look at that goal and I never understand why that's still a thing. I think that's part of the game. You have to play through that stuff. The Bruins have had calls go against them too. I don't really understand that line of thinking on the NHL's part.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always thought when it comes to things like inbounds, out of bounds, that's actually pretty clear when you can see it. You got to make those calls. There's certain things that are a little bit tougher to kind of decide. That's tough. You've got the replay. You've got to use it. We're too far past it now to be able to. You either do it. You're either all in or you're all out. You know what I mean? So, but it's still just a really tough break for the Bruins to kind of get it that way. Really, everything was, again, you have the disallowed goal. You have that kind of fluky giveaway. Even on that third goal, you had a weird bounce that kind of kicks back out to the Oilers. There were a bunch of weird bounces tonight, but again, you want to money puck this game. This was a Bruins, 65-35 sort of situation, just in terms of controlling it, even though they didn't really play their best game. It's not the type of game you're going to get nervous or annoyed if you're a Bruins fan, but we're so freaking greedy at this point, Evan. You just want them all. And when they lose, you're just like, you're like, that doesn't happen to us.
It doesn't.
That's the kind of vibe that when they lose, it's, everyone's like, that's so odd.
Well, it's so weird to watch them lose on home ice now,
Yeah,
in this
exactly.
game, but it's funny, like, there were a few things that stood out to me in this game. You know what number one though was, John, and maybe you guys will spin this as I'm a homer, I'm too positive, whatever. The Bruins shut McDavid down. I think that's a legit thing. I mean, again,
That
you're
would
not
have been the
facing.
story if they didn't give up 3 unanswered goals.
Exactly. But again, I look at some of the unanswered stuff and Bergeron's miscue. That doesn't normally happen. But again, I look at I look at them shutting McDavid down. Now again, you're not playing him in the playoffs unless you go to the Cup, right? This is not McDavid on the Lightning or McDavid on the Leafs or the Hurricanes where you're going to potentially face him in the first 3 rounds. You're probably not. Maybe you'll face him in the Cup final if the Oilers are there and if you get there. But what I find interesting is the 3 players who went up against McDavid the most tonight were Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Dmitry Orlov.
Orlov, yep.
To me, the real takeaway is you have 3 number 1 defensemen who can shut down another team's top player or top couple of players. And I think, again, that I'm beating, I guess, a really alive horse here because it's a good thing. But this shows how the depth they can put against you on defense. You have 3 defensemen
Yes.
who you can comfortably put out against a guy like McDavid and do all right against. I find that interesting.
Stuff like that is obviously going to bode well, and it's just so interesting just how the Bruins are built this year. Yeah, it's a tough road getting to the Stanley Cup Finals, and just the teams they're going to have to get through. Whether it's Toronto or Tampa in round 2, potentially Carolina, who's extremely difficult to play in the conference finals. But just seeing them have virtually no holes, again, just seems to be just to me a team that's going to be extremely difficult to beat in a 7-game series, because you're not going to be like, oh, that team, like they're the team that wears people down. You've now got that back end sort of play. You've got the strength of your team is arguably at this point your defense, which is insane. And you've got goaltenders that are basically, 50 goals saved above expected on the season combined. So, I mean,
yes.
You're worried you're going to lose a game or have a game stolen from you. That's less likely to happen when you're the one with the ridiculous net minding back there. And I do want to talk about Swayman a little more, kind of like, again, you always have to look big picture stuff. Literally nothing matters for the Bruins other than getting into the playoffs and then just having a good, healthy,
and
long
being fully
run.
healthy. Yes.
But
health.
Yeah. So like you saw DeBrusk take a hit earlier and get doubled over. I was like, oh no. I was like seeing flashes of Foligno in my eyes. But I do want to talk about Swayman a little bit. Like, they're talking about it on the game broadcast, and I think it's fair to point out, like, you put his numbers up there, and again, you're talking about 26, 27 starts, but again, his overall statistics are that of a starter, are that of an elite starter. I think 5'6", he's 5'6", in all of the goalie metrics, including goals saved above expected. I think he's 3rd or 4th overall per game, behind maybe Ullmark and Islanders. Losing it for a second. Sorokin. Last I checked. So, I mean, elite goaltending numbers, and he's probably not going to whiff the ice unless Ullmark like implodes or falls on his face. He's dead. He's insurance in the playoffs.
That's what's hilarious to me. And that's why, I always found it funny when people were saying, like, not a lot of people, it was, Adam Jones on NBC saying, oh, trade Jeremy Swayman. It's like, no, that is the greatest insurance policy the Bruins could possibly have. God forbid something happens to Ullmark injury-wise or whatnot, and you have Swayman there behind him. And again, I just, John, it's funny, like, you and I have not talked Bruins all year, so this is kind of us kind of like getting it in with Bruins.
I'm just glad to see you. I want to give you a big goalie hug. I don't get to see enough of you.
Yeah. I know. And you just look at, like, everything's going right. I know this is a thing that Connor and I have talked about all year. Everything is going right. And Swayman's a good instance of that. I know tonight, the goal from the point, the Nurse shot kind of went through him. That stuff's going to happen. Like, and it's like games. And I think the main takeaway from this game for me, aside from, shutting McDavid down, is these games are going to happen, right? The biggest thing for me with this team is, who is beating them 4 times over the course of 7 games?
That's what I can't see. That's the thing. It seems it's always been the opposite, where like,
Yes.
how are the Bruins going to beat Tampa 4 times or a team
Yes.
like that? And now it feels like you're right because of how stacked they are, how clean they play their game, and how much they're not going to get their best players aren't going to get beat up as much as they have in the past. You're not only relying on 2 and 3 guys to carry. If they don't score, if they don't do anything, you're dead. And that back line help that you have, the strength of your defense, not only being able to check a player like McDavid and keep him off the score sheet, one shot virtually invisible all night long, but to be driving the offense and bringing the puck up and doing all of these things. They've never had all of that. And again, I'm going through my entire run. Even the Cup teams had more question marks, than this team currently. It doesn't mean it's an automatic, but I mean, there were more question marks involving the teams that went to and lost the Stanley Cup, in St. Louis and Chicago, and even the one that won it in 2011.
It's funny. There was someone recently who said, that you worry that the Bruins are kind of like the 2018-19 Lightning, who, were the wagon of the league.
And then first
trophy,
round out, yeah.
First swept in the first round, right? I say not at all. This team is, I think the veteran leadership is a lot better, but I also look at they find again, they lost tonight, so whatever, but they find ways to win games. You go back to that Calgary game like a week or two ago, where they're outshot like 54-17 or whatever it was. Hallmark sets the franchise record for saves with 54, and they find a way to win. Like, again, to me, I know that they have not faced a big losing streak this year. Right now doesn't look to be the losing streak if you look up ahead of who they're playing the next couple, the next week or so. But they have found ways to win. They've overcome injuries at the beginning of the year. Remember that, John? Remember last summer when the whole tone was, was it Grzelcyk, McAvoy, Marchand out to start the year? Rebuild, tank for Connor Bedard, right? Like, you go back to that, and it's funny, like, how things change and how they overcame those injuries at the beginning of the year. And I just, again, you're right that the 2011 team had more holes. The 2019 team really kind of only got to the Cup final because the path was wicked easy at the time with the young Hurricanes and the Blues too.
Exactly. Yep.
So I mean, again, I think, I don't know if people on here want me to get all bothered about this loss. I don't, because it's one of their last 11. So again, I just go back to how this, you said it, John, like, there just aren't holes in the roster. Even like, look at Taylor Hall, right? Taylor Hall goes down, Lord knows when he'll be back, whatever it is, and they're fine. That third line was fairly good tonight. Bertuzzi, Coyle, and Frederick. That line, Coyle passed up a few shots tonight that he probably should have taken. You wonder if he scores those or not. But again, I look at that third line, and they're not missing a beat. Bertuzzi was really effective tonight. And I think Bertuzzi will be effective. He's a really interesting one. Because again, that's a guy who was a top line left winger with the Red Wings, 30-goal scorer last year. And suddenly with this team, he's a third line left winger. So again, I can't say enough about Bertuzzi potentially replacing Taylor Hall. And then if Taylor Hall does come back for the playoffs, John, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like, what on earth? That third line. So again, there aren't holes. There just aren't holes with this team.
There's not. And in fact, you're having weird conversations now, like odd men out. And it's going to be really difficult ones. And I know probably, again, in our chat here right now, oh my God, dude, you got to chill with this stuff. I got to put you in timeout again. I'm sorry. You can't be saying things that you're saying about Grizz right now.
Oh God, yeah, I did just notice that. My goodness.
Let's relax a little. But Grzelcyk obviously
a lot. Let's relax a lot. Actually,
let's relax a lot. Someone drawing the fans' ire right now because of the giveaway and because whatever led to a goal earlier. Okay. I'm sorry. He blows the right. He blows a tire.
Blows a tire 4-on-1.
And then 4-on-1. That stuff happens. I'm not going to, condemn the guy for that one thing, but it is really interesting considering like Grzelcyk was just kind of a lock top 2 pairing defenseman, and now legitimately might be fighting for a slot, as you've got this interesting 7-man rotation with the D-core. And you don't want to say anyone's auditioning at this point in the season, but like, you got to pick and choose. And, I think you are going to for lack of a better term, play the hot hand a little bit, trying to figure out who's in and who's out. And you've got your automatic 5, and it's that 6th one that's always going to rotate.
That's an interesting thing because like it's a good problem to have, right? You have 7 legitimate defensemen who deserve to play every night, and they won't. There's one that will not, unless there's an injury, which easily could happen. You see Forbert blocking every shot in his
right.
10-foot vicinity. Like you never know, but Grzelcyk's an interesting case, and I think again he blows a tire. Grzelcyk is arguably the best skater on the Bruins, so I'm not gonna say technical and everything. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say like, oh man, his skating is great. The playoff numbers with him have been iffy over the years. We
and
saw
you're
him
also
kind of
worried about the size and getting worn down in the playoffs.
Yes.
And that's the kind of thing is like, you want that physicality there. It's funny. Like, it's always like, it's kind of that blanket where you pull it up and it's too short and it doesn't cover your feet and you pull it down and you're cold up top. Like you put a guy like Grzelcyk in to get puck moving stuff, and then you're getting eaten up and you can't clear the zone, and guys are just pushing people around, and you're having a difficult time on the, and the forecheck is killing you. Then you put in a guy who's a little bit heavier and you're like, oh God, we can't friggin' move the puck. So the thing is, this year you don't have that issue as much because the decor is so much solid, basically 1 through 6, 1 through 7, that a guy like Grzelcyk absolutely, I'm not gonna say can hide, but you're not counting on him to carry as big a defensive load as he would have in past years when he ends up being a top pairing or second pairing defenseman and he's out there against the other team's best players. It's a different environment for him.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get Grzelcyk on that third pairing with either Clifton or Forbert, I mean, you're cooking. And I think, again, like you look at what Grzelcyk offers you in zone exits, plays in transition, zone entries. Again, I have such a tough time. I understand people get annoyed with him with his size and things like that, but it's so hard to find his puck moving abilities. Forbert can't do that. And granted, Grzelcyk can't do what Forbert does. Like, and I've said this to Connor a bunch of times this year, and Connor's kind of said the same thing. Like, they all do. Clifton, Forbert, and Grzelcyk all do different things, right? Like, Clifton's kind of a blend. Grzelcyk's the puck mover. Forbert's the shutdown guy. It comes down to matchups, right?
Yeah, you can pick and choose, right?
Yes, if you're playing the Capitals, who are a hard team, which granted now they lost Hathaway and Orlov, and Lord knows what ends up happening to them. But let's say you play the old Capitals, right? They're gonna forecheck hard. They're going to hit hard. They're going to be on top of you, right? That's a game. That's a matchup in which you'd probably want like Forbert and Clifton. But if you're playing the Hurricanes, who are fast on you and aren't super physical, but just hard on forechecks and right on puck carriers, you want a guy like Grzelcyk who can kind of sift through that and make those passes. So, again, it comes down to matchups. I also don't think they're going to get in like fully healthy. I think you're going to have a defensive
That's always
injury.
the thing, man.
That happens, And so again, I don't, I know every time there's a Grzelcyk might be the most polarizing player on the Bruins. I think like it used to be Tuukka Rask, right? That was always the guy, but now it's Grzelcyk, which again, it's a smaller scale. But again, I just look at how, people, anytime there's a mistake, like I tweeted the clip, and maybe this is my fault. I tweeted a picture of the 4-on-1 and said, like, not ideal. And all the comments were like, Grzelcyk's terrible. Grzelcyk sucks. Oh my God. Like, and I remember like anytime around the deadline, anytime Grzelcyk would make a turnover, people would be like, oh, trade him. He should be gone. Right. Like, see you, Grzelcyk. But in reality, like, you need him. You need him. And again, like I mentioned this at the deadline.
If your biggest problem on this team is that you think Matt Grzelcyk sucks, then the team has no problems. You know what I mean? If you're worried that like a guy who's been a pretty good top 2 pairing defenseman for the last few years for you isn't good enough to make the top 6 and is the 7th guy on the team and the odd man out, so be it. That's, again, champagne problems. If that's your biggest problem, your last defenseman, you're fine. I mean, you're fine.
You're fine.
Most teams don't have that luxury. They don't have that luxury to be able to hate a guy like Matt Grzelcyk. Most teams would be like, oh, thank God we got this guy. This really rounds out our decor. So, again, it's all relative.
And I find Grzelcyk's an interesting one because the Bruins were the best team in hockey when Grzelcyk was a top 4 defenseman.
Yes,
Grzelcyk was a top 4 defenseman all year. Like, it just changed recently because of Orlov, but Grzelcyk was a top 4 guy.
And people liked it. They felt good about it, right?
Yeah, and there were even times this year where he wasn't as great as he had been in past years, and they were still getting by fine. And you even look at a guy like Carlo, who's another kind of polarizing guy that he's one that you know has had a lot of injury issues in the past. But again, I just look at how Carlo is. When he's at his best, Carlo is so effective. And I know a lot of some people are saying, "Oh, trade Brandon Carlo at the deadline," and it's like, for
So
what?
I, I do want to mention this. I believe, and I think that people get. I'm not saying you're getting it wrong. I think that people kind of there's more to when you're saying trade a guy. You're not saying trade them because you hate them. What it is you're looking at your team and you're saying we're really good. What if we could probably afford to lose this guy to get better somewhere else? It's almost like the fantasy trade where you roll two guys up into one. I want my wide receiver one, so I'm going to trade two
Yes.
really good players. So you're thinking like, could Swayman and Carlo get me like a star, and that's kind of where people mind go. Obviously, you're better on your team with Swayman and Carlo than you are without them, but could you do something and address a different need if you think that you're okay with the decor the way that they are, and maybe someone needs a guy like Carlo and you can get yourself something else? I've also always been in favor of not always just trading in one direction where you give picks away to get better somewhere. You might also turn around and give a player away to get picks back as well. You could do both at the same time. So, like, could you have traded Brandon Carlo for a first after having gotten Dmitry Orlov and been okay? Maybe. I don't know. That's all I'm saying is I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but this team's clearly better for having Grzelcyk, Carlo, Swayman.
Yes.
So there's no doubt about that. So both things can be true. Like you could have explored potentially a trade, but that's fine. You mentioned him quickly. I did want to talk about it. We're not going to, spend all night here. We're just dipping our toe in the
People
water
in the chat
here.
are saying we got to bash Grant Williams because it's all the Garden Report people. I have
Well,
not. I can't. I'm not in a position to bash Grant Williams, so I cannot. This is not the place. But I know they want you to bash Grant
no,
Williams.
not this is not the forum for it. What I want to talk about is, you have a player like Dmitry Orlov, who we don't have the benefit of seeing on a nightly basis before he came to Boston. You know the type of player he is. You've seen him in action. You have some idea of like what he brings to the table. And very casual fans who honestly never see or can barely remember, you're kind of, I guess this guy's got a good reputation. That's cool. Then you watch him play like night in, night out, shift after shift after shift, and you're like, oh my God, this guy's freaking unbelievable. Like I just get more and more and more impressed watching him every single minute he's on the ice.
Yeah, and again, I mean his offensive contributions the past week. I mean, got him first star, I believe. He's been incredible, but really the impact that I love the most with him is defensively, how good he is in his own zone and how much of he's only 5'11". He's kind of a shutdown defenseman
Yeah.
in his own end, which I find really impressive.
Right.
He had a great hit on Leon Draisaitl that sent Draisaitl
He's a
flying.
big boy too.
Big dude, like
Yeah.
big Russian guy, like
big boy.
yeah, but I also I love just how he moves the puck, right? It's quick. It's, he makes smart plays, kind of like Hampus Lindholm. Like Hampus Lindholm to me is the most just makes smart plays with the puck, which is really all you want out of a defenseman. And Lindholm is the king at just making, I just hit my mic, the king of hitting, of making the easy play, right? Orlov does that a little bit, but he also makes some really nice passes in transition, which I love. And I think, again, that serves you so well. And going, just not to harp on Grzelcyk, but again, if you are to sit Grzelcyk for a game, you can kind of sleep peacefully knowing, hey, Orlov is here as well, who is a good transitional defenseman. But again, Orlov also, I mean, in the offensive zone, so good. I know Connor wrote a story today, I think, kind of exploring the idea of Orlov potentially on the power play, which that power play continues to be, not great.
He's gotten, and that is a problem. And if you're going to talk about one thing that's kind of, like you're not loving right now, it's definitely the power play. And I think he's gotten a little bit of run on it. I mean, at this point in time, if you're Montgomery, like that's what you're going to do. Like this is kind of a load managed cycle. You're actually very fortunate, and they've been doing it with the defensemen, cycling one in, one out, and kind of
Yeah.
just giving people a day off, not based on being benched or being whatever, just kind of like, okay, you take a night off and you take a night off. So in addition to that, there's also time to kind of screw around a little bit and experiment with some things and try some different combos. I know he said it the other night when Bertuzzi played, and he kind of spent most of his time with Coyle and Frederick, obviously, both of whom are kind of in there because of injuries with Hall and Foligno. You don't know when those guys are coming back, but Montgomery said there, like, we could mess around. Like I might try them different places. I think that's what you kind of got to do here is try out different power play units, move some people around. Again, Bertuzzi, I know, got a couple of shifts on the second PP unit, kind of there as that net front guy. This is the time to kind of goof around and see if you can find some things, unlock a few things, because you have so many pieces and so many talented players. Like, why not kind of, see what you can do with them at this point.
Yeah, and
And
also, I mean,
you're
again,
incorporating new people. You have to kind of figure a few things out.
yeah, and again, you're in March right now, right? So the playoffs are about a month away. You do want to rest guys, whether it's Bergeron for a game or Marchand. Like you do want to give guys nights off, and I think
Yeah.
that my guess is that's what they end up doing. So yeah, you got to try new people on the power play. As a whole, can they? Will they? Will they? It's funny because in past seasons the Bruins power play has been elite, and the 5-on-5 scoring has not been great. Right? This year it's completely different. I'm not trying to be Mr. Spin Zone here, but I'd rather this situation. Obviously, you want the power play to be better. They have the personnel to be really good on the power play. I think
Yeah.
teams have just kind of figured out certain glitches, the one-timer from Pastrnak, Bergeron in the bumper, things like that. I think teams have
Yep.
kind of hunkered down on. So it's kind of about making those adjustments and
Yeah,
finding the
because
right mix.
it felt like for a while that their power play was like batting 1,000. Like, it was shocking when
Yeah.
they didn't score. And so it is weird when you see like this power outage kind of going on right now. Another thing I thought was interesting about the game was uh, again, Brad Marchand, the type of season that he's had. They've talked about on the game broadcast here, Evan, that he was saying to them that he thought he'd be better now, that, he's not all the way back and he doesn't feel all the way back. And if he's not all the way back by this point in the season, he's probably not all the way back for the rest of the season. And again, you don't know anything beyond that. He's getting up there in age. When you have friggin' double hip surgery,
Yeah.
like I the I think everyone kind of got lost in like how ridiculous it was how early he came back and the fact that he was an effective player almost right out of the gate. But all of these months later, Marchand's saying that he doesn't quite feel himself. Does he not look himself to you?
There have been times this year where I think that he hasn't looked himself, for sure. I think there have been, we're used to kind of a certain Marchand. The numbers are still relatively good this year. I know, in the past he's been arguably the top left winger in hockey. This year, I mean, again, coming off double hip surgery, it's hard to be like, hey man, you got to average what you were points per game the past couple of years. I mean, again, the Bruins have been fortunate. They have depth now, right? They have more scoring depth. They're getting scoring from more places. So, yeah, if Marchand isn't what he was the past couple of years, you can still be okay. Like you have that check line is working so well on the second
Yeah.
line. DeBrusk is adding so much more on the right side on that first line. He's been revitalized. Third line's helping as well. I mean, yeah, has Marchand looked himself this year? Not to the level that we're used to. But I still think like he's still been effective, and I still think in the playoffs you do have to rely on him. Now, is him not being himself gonna lose you a series against the Hurricanes? Probably not. Again, maybe I'm being too optimistic here. People can feel free to take shots if they'd like. But again, I don't think that is going to make or break a playoff series. What I do think would make or break a playoff series is Linus Ullmark has never played this many games before.
Yeah.
And the playoff pedigree is not there with Ullmark or Swayman. Last year wasn't amazing. Prior to that, neither had really done anything in the playoffs. So that to me, like what could go haywire, which I don't think will, but what could is in net, right? That's the
I
only
know.
area.
That's
And that's a tough thing.
That's the weird thing, right? Because the thing that actually, as good as they've been almost everywhere, the person playing above and beyond, not just where you would expect that person to be on a personal level, just relative to the rest of the league, is Linus Ullmark, who is clearly far and away the best goaltender in hockey, statistically speaking, and honestly with the eye test all year long. Yet you do have this weird kind of like, what if he turns back into a pumpkin at the wrong time vibe, because he's not tested. And I never know which side of this argument to land on. Like, does it matter? Like, was Tim Thomas tested before he had the greatest run in the history of like whatever, when he won his Stanley Cup, like, I mean, yes, Tim Thomas had been around more and had been a starting netminder and a successful one, but I mean, he was on another planet. Tim Thomas, his legacy exists because of that one playoff run. Linus Ullmark could be that guy, or he could be a guy who shows up and kind of reverts back to last year's Linus Ullmark, who was fine, but a beatable goalie and kind of closer to league average. And that would be a real bummer.
Yeah, it would be, because he's the Vezina. He should win the Vezina.
He's already won it. He might even be in the Hart race at this point, honestly. So like, that's what's so strange is like, that goaltenders, I always feel, right or wrong, I always feel you need a pocket or a period of top level play of 3, 4, 5 years before you can feel comfortable that that's your guy. Otherwise, I find there's so much variance in goaltender performance that one guy can be statistically, up here one year, and all of a sudden they're like talking about goaltending controversy because this guy's no good anymore and it's become a liability. So Ullmark's not proven in the sense that you really do need to see it for a longer period of time with goaltenders to feel really good. Like you look at Igor, fine. He's not the dominant guy in having the year he had last year. He's still clearly one of the top 3, 4, 5 goalies in the NHL.
Oh,
there's no question about Vasilevsky and this and that, So yeah, Ullmark, that's going to be in the back of your mind entering the playoffs. Like, is he ready for this?
It's an interesting thing. I mean, you think about like, I remember in 2011, I know everyone compares this to 2011 because the 2011 team won the cup, but you remember that first round, they lost the first 2 games, right? Yeah. And I can only imagine, right? Now, again, first round, the Bruins are getting the second wild card team. Right now, I don't know who that's going to be. I'm not really, I don't think anyone is focused on that. I think everyone's focused on that second round series if, you're playing either Tampa or Toronto. And then third round, conference final, potentially Carolina or the Rangers, who, beefed up a lot at the deadline. But again, I look at, if Ullmark has a bad first game of the playoffs, right? Or if Ullmark has 2 bad games, are they going to Swayman?
No way.
Again, we're looking far ahead, by the way. We're looking so far ahead. Connor and I never do this, but we're looking very far ahead. But I do think it's an interesting kind of thing to think about. But even you go back to Thomas in 2011, right? He didn't play in the 2010 playoffs. He was not their goalie the year before in the playoffs. Right. And the years before, I mean, they were out to Carolina in the second round in 08-09. But so my point, I'm kind of hitting on your point there where it's like, Ullmark's just hot this year.
Yeah.
Thomas was hot in 11. Like,
Thomas wasn't Thomas. Tim Thomas wasn't Tim Thomas until he was Tim Thomas,
yes.
However you want to say it, like, that's what happened. Like, that's how it happened.
Yeah. And again, Ullmark has been on another level. I mean, he'd
been around. He'd never played at that level, before.
Yeah. And you just look at Ullmark this year. And again, I know he didn't play tonight, obviously, but you just look at how many games he's stolen this year for them. I mean, Calgary's the obvious one, but there's a bunch of others that he's carried them in. And I think one thing that a lot of national people look at and go, oh, the Bruins are the #1 team. Ullmark can't win the Vezina. His team's so good around him. There have been a lot of games Ullmark has stolen for the Bruins that, again, I don't think many goalies are winning those games. So, yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to like, these are such minor issues. If your issues are Grzelcyk on D, Ullmark potentially, not having playoff experience, so you wonder what that is. Like, they're fine. They're fine.
It's champagne problems, right?
Like, fine. And again, there's no reason to worry about Thursday's loss.
The reason you worry about the Bruins is just simply because it's a bitch of a road going through the Eastern Conference to get to the Stanley Cup final, if you can do that, because there's so much talent there. And hockey, obviously, being a sport that has the greatest amount of variance, and we know the stat right now. The Bruins are heading towards an unprecedented regular season. We saw what happened when Tampa Bay had one similarly. They were swept in the first round. The last 7 President's Trophy winners have been bounced in the first or second round. So again, it doesn't mean anything, and it's because hockey's a tough freaking sport to predict who's going to win, even when you have dominant teams. It's when you get there and you get into the playoffs, it's always a lot closer. It's always a lot tighter. And like I said, the hot goalie, puck luck, just more variance in general. The best team doesn't always win. So you can't be better positioned than the Bruins are entering the playoffs. So I don't think there's a lot to complain about. I think you're just crossing your fingers, waiting for good health, and that's that. People are mad, oddly mad about this loss tonight. I just don't know how you get mad about it.
I know. So when they started to lose, I was like, damn, people are like, some people are just not going to want to watch anything about this game because it's the one loss in the last 100 years.
Right, you're drunk on the success right now, and yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to point out that this was a one-off Bruins post-game show, but the idea is to increase the volume of these things as we head towards the playoffs, and then try to bring you some playoff post-game shows featuring Evan Marinofsky and possibly a host of characters that could contribute in here, not named John Zannis. I think you guys see enough of me over on the other channel.
Many Garden Report people are like, John, talking Bruins, what is this? But John, you've talked Bruins with me for a long time. I remember like the 2020 COVID bubble playoffs, you were doing stuff with me. So you're a Bruins guy.
I've covered Bruins my whole, it's again, you do what I do, or you do what I did. It wasn't a beat. I covered all sports. You cover all sports. I've covered every Bruins Cup run. I've been there start to finish. Actually, one of my favorite professional experiences was following that 11 team around all the way to Vancouver, and an incredibly, just incredible experience. A great group of guys. It was a ton of fun. But I loves me some hockey, man. So I'll jabber on. I'll jabber on with anybody about anything, but I would like to leave it to the pros. Obviously, you have Evan, you've got Connor. You're going to have a Poke the Bear podcast coming tomorrow where they can talk about some kind of big picture things, that's facing the team. So make sure to check that out, and just keep an eye out for more notifications from CLNS Media as we kind of hone in on our post-game coverage plans, and we'll start to tell you about them. And we hope to kind of build up a swell of momentum, just like kind of the Bruins have been all season long heading into the postseason. So we're going to wrap it. Bruins lose. They lose. It's okay.
The one time. They lost.
Topes lose. Yep. Yeah. They lose to Edmonton. They fall to 49-9-5 on the season. And they will be back. Next game is
Saturday, I want to say, right?
It is Saturday, 1 o'clock. They got the back-to-backs with Detroit, Saturday, Sunday. Home and home with the Red Wings, right? Coming up. Is that right? It's a weird one.
Yes, it is. Yeah. They do this like every year, right around this time. They do a game here, and then they go right to Detroit. So
okay. So that's what they're doing.
Fine.
So we'll have coverage of those games as well in one form or another. Subscribe to Bruins Ringside if you haven't already. Tell all your friends about it. Hit that little bell for the notifications. Be notified when we do videos and go live. And that is that. We will see you guys